Welcome to another episode of the Libertarian Christian Podcast, a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute and part of the Christians for Liberty Network. I am your host, Doug Stuart. And if you are watching, you are on YouTube and not just listening to it, you will see that I have a special guest. Her name is Abby Olcese. She's a writer on film, pop culture, and faith, and she's also film editor for The Pitch, a website and magazine serving the greater Kansas City, Missouri area, which is also where she lives. Abby, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, this has been a pleasure. I got a pre-order copy of your book called Film for All Seasons. Here we go. See if I can hold up to the camera correctly. Experiencing the Church Year at the Movies. Now, this is not at the theaters because obviously you're not going to be telling people in the future to go into the theaters and prepare for them for what to watch, but to watch movies, I'm assuming at home probably, throughout the church year. And I'm into film. I like being entertained. I also like being provoked in my thinking and even in my faith. And that seems to be right up your alley. So your book was very attractive to me when IVP reached out to, as a possible review copy. And so I was like, wow, this looks really fun. And I get it. And I'm a little disappointed only because I really don't need to consume the book this month. I have to read it throughout the year. So I haven't, it's one of those things that this is going to be on my nightstand because my wife and I will, once a week or so watch movies and watch a movie or a show or something. So this book will stick with me for the next year and it's properly timed. So thank you for writing it. And I just want to let you introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers. What's your background? What's it in? What are some of your interests? And how did you get to write this book?
Yeah. I am a film critic and a Christian, and a lot of those things in my writing tend to kind of intersect in one way or another. I also write for a number of directly Christian outlets. I'm a columnist at Sojourners magazine, and I also am a regular contributor to a website called Think Christian, both their website and their podcast. And I also write for a number of mainstream places as well. So The Pitch is an alt monthly in print, but online all the time, paper in Kansas City, where I live. And I've also contributed to places like Paste and RogerEbert.com. I'm all over the place. Anybody will pay me.
That's good.
And
good.
Yeah. It gets it done. And so the book actually sprang from a article series that I did for the Think Christian website during the pandemic, because as you know, a lot of churches were closed or doing services only virtually during the pandemic. So when it came to church holidays, that meant that a lot of times people couldn't go and be with their friends and their congregation in church. So, one of the alternatives, Josh Larson, the guy who wrote my foreword and is the co-host of the Film Spotting podcast and a great writer in his own right, he is the editor at Think Christian and assigned me to come up with a listicle of movies to watch. At the time, I think it was for Holy Week. And so that ended up being pretty popular. And after that, I just kept getting assigned more and more articles to the point where basically I ended up covering, I think, everything but All Saints Day and All Souls Day. So after I'd done that for about a year, and I'd had a lot of fun writing the articles, finding movies to kind of consider in that light, and also getting to do research on some parts of the church calendar that we don't really talk about all that much. Like I got assigned to write an article about movies to watch for Pentecost, which at the time felt like a real stretch because that's like a single one day church holiday that not every church even talks about. And can be kind of abstract in terms of like what the themes of that holiday actually are. But that was a really fun one to research. I found all kinds of interesting and unexpected ways to take that idea. So after I'd done that for a while, it just kind of hit me like a thunderbolt that I could expand those lists and those entries into full essays and get to do even more research and work on on all of it.
I can imagine that one of the most difficult parts of writing this book was picking one movie for a chapter, or like I'm imagining if you've watched lots of movies, and so you probably had maybe a dozen for Advent, and you only got to pick 2 or 3.
Yeah. My personal favorite part of the church year is Lent. It's and Holy Week as well, because they're times of real high drama, and as a person who loves storytelling and loves movies, that's something that I'm really drawn to, and so I think people keep asking me of like movies that they like and where they belong, and more often than not, my answer is I think that's a Lent movie. Anything that has to do with like redemption or I don't know, regret, sin, or like fighting back against dark forces. I feel like those are all pretty apt Lenten themes.
Yeah. Do you have a list of like what other films you'd add that you couldn't fit in the book?
I initially had an essay on Into the Spider-Verse for Ascension Day, but that ended up not working out because it kind of touched on some similar themes that were in a different essay in the book that I really didn't want to get rid of. So I kind of had to alter my approach there. But I was really proud of that essay, and I'm kind of bummed it didn't make it in.
Is it? Can somebody find it elsewhere, or is it just sitting on your hard drive?
It's just sitting on my hard drive, but maybe one day I'll find a place to put it.
Okay. I just because of that in particular movie, I'm very interested in one day seeing that in print somewhere.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
Absolutely.
That's an incredible movie in a number of ways. So one thing that you grew up, I think, in a sort of low church environment. I don't remember if you said it was like Baptist or something and like that, and you sort of shifted to a more high church environment. Is that correct?
Yeah, more or less.
What was that experience like for you? And do you think that helped you with writing this book in a particularly structured way?
Yeah, it definitely did. I grew up kind of mostly Presbyterian. There's a little bit of Covenant in there too, but mostly Presbyterian. And so I was aware of like the major parts of the church calendar. So like Advent, Christmas, Holy Week, Easter. I was aware of the concept of Pentecost, kind of. But that was basically it. And I ended up being part of, I worked for the Episcopal Diocese of Kansas as a campus ministry intern for a couple of years, just because I got involved with that in college. I had a lot of friends that were part of that group. And at the time, I kind of bristled against some of it because it was such a different thing where I would just look at certain traditions and be like, we're doing that? Really? Like you call it this? This language is so like restrictive. It's hard to it's not necessarily accessible. It kind of takes a while to get used to. But once I kind of settled in and understood what the concepts were behind why the church did things certain ways, I really got attuned to like the rhythms of the church year. I came to really appreciate it. The Episcopal Church is really big on All Saints Day and All Souls Day in particular. And I came to really appreciate the way that they observed those holidays, and they became kind of important to me.
Yeah, I think the rhythm of liturgy in the church year is something that's underappreciated, especially by me, but I think broadly what you could call evangelicalism and even mostly low church American Christianity. I think that's definitely something we could all add to our lives. I have failed as a father to like incorporate this into our lives as a family, even though like I swear I probably have a book that's about 10 years old that I had like ambitions to like go through the church year with devotionals with my family. And then, dinner time just doesn't work out that way every week. And I wanted to incorporate that. And so this might actually work because this is actually, this might actually get you to get me to do something because all but one of my children actually really loves to watch movies and things like that. Which actually brings me to a question. How watchable, because I haven't seen all these movies and I don't believe what the ratings are on some of these, but how watchable are these for family viewing in your mind?
So there are a few that I probably wouldn't recommend younger kids view. So like The Last Temptation of Christ is in there. There's a movie called Bad Times at the El Royale that I love, but I would probably reserve that for like a teenager or older. But the nice thing about the book is that there's an appendix in the back that has other options. And a lot of those some of those are family-friendly movies that can take the place of ones that don't quite work for younger viewers.
Gotcha.
So there's something in there for everybody.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a question I always like to ask Christian film critics and people who are really into film. And it's a shift that I had to make from college when I started to study film a little bit and seek it as something beyond just entertainment. And I think a lot of times we look at movies as like, hey, we're going to go watch Top Gun and we're going to be entertained and we're going to have a lot of fun and it's going to be great. But I don't think a lot of people appreciate that this is in some sense good literature if it's well written or something like that. I mean, maybe people kind of acknowledge that, to some extent. Yeah. But what is your explanation? How do you help people see beyond the entertainment value of a movie? Because It's both, right? And it influences us in a way that's beyond entertainment. Maybe Top Gun's not a great example, but even that probably has certain themes. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I think is so interesting about film, and it's really, I mean, film criticism is a form of art criticism. So really, a lot of the things that are interesting about art criticism are also interesting about film criticism. And one of them is context, like historical and cultural context. So like you mentioned, Top Gun, that's a movie that came out in the 80s. And the attitude toward the military, a form of patriotism that existed in the 80s was, that's very much on screen in Top Gun. And that's an attitude that some people still have, other people might not have. But if you didn't grow up in the 80s and are really curious as to what people were thinking about then, watching Top Gun will give you one particular point of view on what was on people's minds.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that I really like doing with older films is looking at what's aged well, what hasn't, but not dismissing it for those reasons. Trying to figure out why they're there in the first place, I think, is really interesting. And I think that's the case with anything from the way that films treat particular social issues to even what's not on screen or what's not being talked about and why those things might not be being talked about. I think all of it leads to some really interesting questions that can take you to cool places.
Yeah, in your book, you mentioned that if people begin watching older movies to look at the way that they were critiqued and look at the film criticism of its own day, why is that? Why do you think that's important for us to look at how did film critics in the 80s, criticize Top Gun, or the 70s criticize the Godfather or something?
Yeah, it depends on the critics that you read. There are some folks like Pauline Kael is a famous example of somebody who wrote with a lot of thought and kind of a lot of literary intent to what she was writing. But the form that criticism has taken really has changed a lot over, even within my lifetime. There's a podcast called You Must Remember This that's hosted by Karina Longworth that's about mostly films made before 1980, but occasionally, the last few seasons, she's gotten into films that were made in the 80s and 90s, and they're fascinating. But one of the things that I find really interesting about that podcast is when she uses excerpts of news and criticism about those films and about the people that made them at the time. And they are just incredibly harsh. I think sometimes it's made with not a lot of kindness. But it's also, I think that's a particularly interesting little slice to see what people were thinking about, what kinds of themes provoke people, what kind of things upset them, the approach that they had to talking about that stuff in a public sphere that maybe we don't now. Yeah. But also, I think it's really interesting to see how certain critics' views have evolved over time. Roger Ebert's a great example of this. He later in life went back over a lot of his reviews that he wrote at a different time in his career. And some of the stuff he agreed with and other stuff he really didn't. And when he didn't, he was very honest about I got this wrong. Either I wasn't in the right frame of mind, the way that we think about this stuff has changed, or just as a person who's at a different age now, I see this differently. So yeah, it's interesting to see how stuff was received at the time, because sometimes stuff that did really poorly at the time has gone on to have a really strong legacy for other reasons. Charles Laughton's Night of the Hunter is a good example of that. That's a movie that flopped so hard when it came out in 1955 that Charles Laughton never got to make another movie. He was an actor, and that was the first and only film he ever directed. But now it's become such an influential movie. You can see fingerprints of it in movies by Spike Lee, the Coen brothers, loads and loads and loads of people. It's one of my favorite movies. It's on the Criterion Collection. So it's worth kind of figuring out what people weren't ready for at the time that we are way more willing to talk about and consider now.
Okay. Well, let's talk about film watching as a spiritual practice, which is a very interesting turn of phrase, right? We're watching films as part of our spirituality. And I think what possible critics of that concept would come to is, the Coen brothers aren't trying to make a film to teach you anything about God or spiritual truths. The Wachowski brothers or sisters aren't trying to, well, maybe they are. I should probably say that, but probably a bad example now that I'm thinking about that with The Matrix and stuff. But not every filmmaker is really trying to tell. They're trying to tell something. They're trying to teach you, not teach you. That's probably not the right word. There is a message somehow, because they wouldn't make it, right? But when we're watching, well, let's take Paddington for example. I don't know, yes, there are spiritual truths to be had from watching this, and is that just a part of like how we interpret and do art criticism, or how do you reconcile the fact that these people aren't even interested in having God teach us things?
That's a good point. Yeah, and I think some of that is the filter through which we watch these things. Like I'm trying to encourage people to try and use that lens to watch more expansively and to be curious about what spiritual truths or questions might exist in stuff that you wouldn't expect. But yeah, the other side of that is that maybe that's not necessarily the intent. But one of the things that I think is really interesting, and one thing that kind of makes movies this great unifying force, or can, is that the questions are still the same. So like Paul King is still asking, how can we be more inclusive of people? What does it look like when we are? And to him, that looks like this bright, joyful, fun, and occasionally silly world where people of different backgrounds all kind of come together to make this beautiful place. And for me, there's an added spiritual element of like, that's a thing that I'm called to do as a Christian. If the world looks like that, that's a more joyful world. And joy for me is a fruit of the Spirit, because that's what Paul teaches us. That's what the Bible teaches us. So it's kind of, I think I'd like to think that I'm not drawing on something that isn't already there in some form. It's just coming from a slightly different perspective. And I think it's an interesting way to try and open up conversations with our friends who may not be believers by saying that, yes, this is here. This is how this person might interpret it. This is how I interpret it. And now we can have a conversation about where those paths cover each other up and where they diverge.
One touch point on, so I like I mentioned at the beginning, I didn't get to read the entire book, but I did read the chapter on Children of Men, and there was or where you mentioned Children of Men, which is a movie from about probably 15, 20 years ago, maybe 2006, I believe. When you mentioned a particular scene in that movie, and it is one of the most visceral scenes that I remember in any film. Like as I look back on any films, like I knew exactly what you meant because I'd seen it. And the touch point that you kind of made, but the I think I wrote down here that you had there was a visceral hope, because in that movie, that scene, it was very, very, well, it was like I just said, it was very visceral, right? In the sense of like it made me remember what hope could look like. And if anybody's familiar with that movie, you kind of understand. And so these themes, I think, in films help. Maybe you can elaborate or maybe disagree. They can help us remember what hope looks like, what justice looks like, what love looks like, even if the filmmaker isn't even trying to teach us a spiritual truth. I mean, maybe they're trying to teach us a spiritual truth, not in a Christian kind of way, but just like, hey, well, this is what love looks like. This is what hope can feel like, actually.
Yeah, that's right on, I think. Yeah, and I think like we often go to the movies to try to escape our reality, for better or worse. I do that sometimes too. Like nobody is immune to that. But I think we're trying to do that because we want to have those experiences of joy, of connection, of delight. And for me, those are all things that come from God. Like those are gifts that are given to people to use to create those opportunities for people. And I mean, those are for the movies that make us feel really good. But for movies that make us think that maybe don't feel great when we're watching them, those are often kind of trying to dig at deeper and more specific things that we're being asked to interrogate. And I think that's a great strength that movies have as well. It just kind of depends on what it is you need in that moment and what that art can give you.
Do you think film and art in general, maybe, and we can just keep it to film, of course, can offer something that many churches often don't?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it depends on the person. And it probably depends on the church. But yeah, I have a number of friends who grew up Christian and now are like they don't go to church or they don't believe. But watching movies with them has been one way for me to really connect with the faith that is part of my life and that they know is part of my life. But may not be what they experienced growing up. And so I've found that to be a great bridge. Night of the Hunter is another, again, good example. It's like my favorite movie of all time because I feel like it's applicable to everything.
Okay.
But yeah,
I haven't actually seen it. That's a new one for me that I'll have to watch.
You're in for a treat, man. It's such a great example of, I think, what many people's experience with church often is, how it's often portrayed, versus a version of Christianity that is really a closer version to to what it should be, what it can be. And being able to show people that has been one of the great delights of my career, is being able to turn people onto that.
So let's talk a little bit about the seasons. You want to give us a sample of some of the films people would be watching if they're following along in your book through some of these seasons? I mean, this episode that we're in 2024. This one will air during Advent, basically.
Okay.
So let's talk about that. If somebody wanted to be done with this episode and go watch a movie, what's a movie or two they would want to watch?
So the chapters they're broken up by they're really like more sections with some sub chapters in there. It's kind of big and expansive, as you might expect from something that covers an entire year.
Yeah.
But the Advent chapter has 4 movies in there that each correspond to the weeks of the church of the Advent calendar, basically. So the Advent wreath has the theme of hope, the theme of faith, the theme of joy, and the theme of peace. So for hope, I have The Last Jedi, the Star Wars movie. For faith, I have The Bishop's Wife, which is an older film from 1947. Joy, we talked about Paddington. I have Paddington and Paddington 2 as examples of what joy.
You kind of need to watch them together. Like. I mean, you kind of got to watch those together anyway.
They comment on each other really well. And the third Paddington movie is coming out soon, so you can prepare for that one by watching these two. Yeah.
Clever word to use. Prepare for it. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
for an Advent film, right?
Yes. As a Paddington fan, I am in my Advent waiting period for the next one. But yeah, and then finally, Peace is the movie Joyeux Noel, which came out, I can't quite remember when, but it was like the mid 2000s, like 2004 or 5, which is a film by Christian Carrion about the World War I Christmas truce between the German troops and the Allied troops. Okay.
Yeah. You have a good number of, there's a good number of weeks in Lent.
6.
what are some of the themes that we'll find in Lent? Because I think I would say that's the most. I wouldn't say most. When I grew up I wouldn't say very low church. I grew up in like essentially a conservative Baptist church or whatever, and Lent was what Catholics do. Right? And so we don't do that. And so I didn't really think about Lent very much. And so it's kind of the new, it's like the entryway into liturgical year for a lot of Protestants who aren't into this.
Yeah.
And so that's what draws my attention. So what is Lent about? And why did you pick some of these movies? Annihilation, Dark Knight. Yeah, that's one I probably won't watch with my kids. Well, no, actually Logan was the one I was thinking of.
Yeah, that's
Bad Times at the El Royale. Groundhog Day, Lucky. Is that like the new one, like from like a couple years ago? By DreamWorks?
Yeah, Lucky. No, this is a 2017 film starring Harry Dean Stanton. It's the last movie that he ever made.
Okay.
So yeah,
I was not thinking I read the right one. Okay.
Oh no, yeah, it's a slightly lesser known movie, but one that I love a lot. So I wanted to kind of give it a platform. But Lent. So Lent is leading into Easter, and a lot of the discussion of Lent is to kind of look at, you're looking at Jesus' journey toward the cross. Like right before Easter, during Holy Week, we have Palm Sunday, which is when Jesus enters Jerusalem, and a lot of churches bring like palm fronds and lay them down, and we talk about his triumphal entry that's followed by just this really disheartening, defeat and crucifixion. But Lent leading up to that is kind of an examination of why the world required that sacrifice in the first place. Both the state that the world was in when Jesus was walking the earth, and how a lot of us, in general, how humans have not really learned the lessons that he came to teach us, or at least we have, but we don't always. We sin. We're humans. We mess up. So Ash Wednesday is the kickoff to Lent, and that's kind of an acknowledgement of just the truth of mortality, that we all die. Our bodies themselves are imperfect, as are humans as a whole. And Annihilation is a really good one to kind of start that off with, because it is also a movie about death on a grand scale. It's one that has a really strong, consistent metaphor of chronic disease and mortality, and how we deal with that, whether it's being afraid of it or interrogating it or seeing it as kind of a changing of states. And then the rest of that section, I kind of tried to kind of take readers on a mini journey of like starting from a place of acknowledgement of mortality and imperfection and the need for forgiveness, the need to repent, and kind of what it looks like to reach for enlightenment. So by the time we get to Groundhog Day, we've kind of addressed the fact that the world has made us into people that we don't want to be, and how can we kind of transcend that? We've decided that we want to transcend that. Now we've reached the point where we feel a little bit better. We're a little bit more self-aware about the place that we occupy, but nothing around us has changed. The world is still the same. So how do we operate in that space? And I think Groundhog Day is a really good one for that, because obviously Phil Connors is repeating the same day over and over and over again, and still learns to find a lot of meaning within that. And so I think that kind of poses a lesson to the rest of us about how we can be of use to our communities. And then the final film, Lucky, Harry Dean Stanton's character in that film is really kind of coming to terms with who he is at this point in his life, who he is as a person, whether or not he's comfortable with that, and deciding what to do with himself, making peace with himself. So that's kind of the note that I wanted to leave it on, is just being able to recognize who we are, the communities that we're part of, and kind of loving the whole of it, while also understanding that we are always in need of growth and forward movement.
Yeah. We don't need to cover like every little section here, because I want readers to, I want people to buy this book and read it and watch what you have, watch these films and what you have to say. But I do have to ask, I'm just going to ask this in reverse. Where do the Guardians of the Galaxy fit into the church year? It's just a question I just always wanted to ask.
Oh, no, for sure. And I mean, people ask about Guardians of the Galaxy. I get more questions about Fast and Furious 6, which I'm really proud of, actually. But it's
well, given the so both of those are in the Pentecost chapter or section or whatever, and given the title, the turbocharged community of faith, that just totally makes sense.
Yeah, I'm glad that you think so. So Pentecost is it's the time of the church year where we kind of recognize the emergence of the early church, which is the passage in Acts where the disciples are at a harvest festival. They're in an upper room talking and praying together, and the people outside, suddenly these tongues of fire come down from heaven, and the people outside are able to hear the disciples speaking in each of their own languages, despite the fact that the disciples are just talking normally. So it's the visiting of the Holy Spirit and kind of the spreading of the idea of faith to a larger group of people. And I always wondered, when I was first assigned that article, I just thought, well, what do you do besides this is the birthday of the church? What more is there? And it turns out that there is a fair amount of writing and scholarship about Pentecost as an opportunity to explore the diversity of the church. Both in terms of like the world, the church universal, and the fact that there are that Christianity is in many different countries, and also within our own communities. Like, how are we recognizing the different perspectives and backgrounds that we each bring to a church community? How do we respect the abilities and needs of each of the people who are part of it? How do we operate as a welcoming and diverse community? And so it turns out that superhero movies are actually a really good analog for that, because often, and as is the case with Guardians of the Galaxy, they're movies about people from different backgrounds with different needs coming together to serve a larger cause. In some cases, not even realizing that that's what they want to do, and realizing through their connection to each other that they do care about each other, that they want to, work on the greater good together, and that they actually care about something more than just what's right in front of them. So that's one of the reasons that I think Guardians of the Galaxy works so well. And also because that movie in particular, those are really argumentative characters. They're really selfish characters. But like recognizably so, because they've all been through forms of trauma that kind of made them have to be self-involved. So being together and having to work for something that is beyond their own immediate need kind of changes that a little bit. And the Fast and Furious movies make a really good analog for that, because the entire series has always been, I think it's always been praised for, well, most of it. It's the later movies have their own issues, but they've mostly been praised for how they have such diverse casts that feel like fully realized, actualized characters, that they have agency. in spaces where, when those movies were coming out, people from those backgrounds, like women, people of color, often did not. And so that's, I think, in that way, it's kind of interesting in a literally diverse sense. But also, Fast and Furious 6 is very specifically about the concept of found family and how it works, the advantage that it has over kind of mercenary. You put people together to serve a purpose. And also the kinds of people who end up getting included in that family who weren't before. So it's really
Okay.
it's one that kind of lends itself to a lot of fun interpretations that I hope people pick up on and enjoy.
I'm pretty sure I saw the first few Fast and Furious movies, and I just haven't seen the others. But like this, it didn't throw me off when I saw this. I was like, oh, that's neat.
That's great.
So now I'm gonna go do that. So yeah. So I have a sense of in which I understand, because about 20 years ago, I kind of went through a phase of like trying to see the gospel in any kind of art that I can, even if it was a stretch or accidental or whatever. And I'm sure I came up with things or noticed things that probably weren't really there, but it stretches your mind to sort of see God working through the way people are creating things like film, like art, like books, and stories and all of that.
Exactly.
Where does God show up in any narrative that gets created? And so, you see film in an Adam Sandler, or you see God in an Adam Sandler movie, and you see hints of the gospel message and these other things. Even if it's not quite right and it's kind of allegorical, you can kind of see hints. And so when you're looking out for it, I guess I guess it's not surprising to see some of your selections here.
That's great.
So yeah, no. Well, I'm glad. I'm excited to look forward to this film year, as I'll call it for a moment here. I want to ask you a question about sort of the industry, about the industry, not of films per se, but there has been a shift with the advent of high-speed internet and streaming to, yes, there's still movies being created, but there's also these like 7-part movies that are basically like a single season show that I feel like I actually prefer, partly because I can watch it in consumable chunks, 45 minutes before I go to bed, and I can just watch it over the course of the next few days or weeks. What's your take on the way in which storytelling is changing so that I don't have to watch everything all in a 2.5 hour or even less stretch? I can stretch that out and actually get more depth out of it. Do you feel like, obviously you probably can agree to some extent, but what do you think of that phenomenon and how storytelling is getting stretched out a bit?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a double-edged sword in that I think mostly the issue that I have with it is what it's done to what gets greenlit and what gets renewed. Because Netflix will sometimes put out an entire season of something all at once, if that show doesn't perform really, really well, like right off the bat, they just axe it. I know of a number of great Netflix shows that only lasted one season and then got cut because they just didn't have room to breathe. They weren't given room to breathe, which is something that in days gone by, when you had an entire season order of a show, which could be, if it was a mid-season replacement, 15 episodes. If it was a full season, something closer to 24 or 26. You really have time to watch that audience grow from week to week over time. So the audience, if the pilot doesn't necessarily do well, it might start gaining through word of mouth, more views. Then by the end of the season, you have enough people to really in good conscience greenlit a second season. So there's that. I think that's kind of the main problem. I've also seen other folks who are their background is more in television, talk about the fact that you kind of lose the opportunity to get one-off episodes that kind of give you insight into the characters. The Buffy the Vampire Slayer has a number of really great one-off episodes that there's a larger arc going on over the course of the season, obviously, but within that, there might be a couple of episodes that kind of connect, but not really, but allow a lot of really fun experimentation with form and storytelling that you don't always get to do, I think, in shows right now. Which is not to say, I don't think that there's really an either or answer. I think that both are great, and I'm a little bit bummed that the current format doesn't really allow for both to exist. But there are definitely strengths, I think, to being able to really deeply engage with characters over a single storyline that lasts that long.
Yeah, I think the sweet spot are the ones that I feel like did really well, or the ones that are like, no, we're just doing a 6-part series and we're not thinking about a season 2. Like, was Apple TV did Blackbird with Taron Egerton. That was really good, and it was like, okay, I don't need a second season. We're good. But a movie might have been a little too short. Kind of situation.
Yeah, I think the show from this year, Bad Monkey, that came out, I think was one that did that really well. Yeah, where it was like a single story over, I think, 8 or 9 episodes, and it was really detailed, really fun, kind of self-contained. But if there are further seasons, it's one that I'd watch a million seasons of that show. It was so much fun.
you and me both. I literally just finished it about 2 weeks ago and started it again with my wife because I was like, this is a good show.
Yeah.
It's one of those unexpected, and Apple doesn't really push hard on a lot of their shows. They release them, they promote them a little bit, and they tend to be really high quality, even if they're not the thing I'm normally interested in.
Right.
But so I have a few like quick lightning round questions if you have just a couple extra minutes here. I wanted to ask you just maybe some fun questions. You've already kind of answered it. I think it's what was the one, your favorite movie of all time? The Night of the Hunter.
Yeah.
I was going to say, what is your desert island film? Would that be it?
Oh gosh. Yeah. It might be that. I mean, if we're talking like specifically, I'm stuck on a desert island and I need something to watch. I might end up picking a Monty Python movie just because I know it would make me laugh. So, like, we're talking like Holy Grail, Life of Brian. Fair point. Yeah.
Any movie that you believe is better than the book?
Ooh, movies that I believe are better than the book. Good question. This is going to sound like the hottest take in the world. I like the Lord of the Rings movies. I'm glad that they have, I like the Lord of the Rings books. I am glad that they have, that they have given us so much story and so much theme, and like they're really deep and rich. I just personally like the movies a little bit more, and it may be because I came to those first, but that's just where I'm at.
I might get that comment might get this show kicked off YouTube, Abby.
I'm aware.
That's a pretty risque take.
And it's by no means is it definitive. Like that is purely a me thing. So
it's just your thing, yeah. Okay. Yeah. If there were so think of any movies that had a fictional president, not like one like who played a president like Reagan or JFK or something. Fictional president, favorite fictional president.
I grew up watching The West Wing with my parents, and they got really into it again over the pandemic. So I think Jed Bartlett might be my guy.
Yeah.
Still.
Okay. I wonder. I think everybody wishes that a president could be like Jed Bartlett.
Well, yeah, exactly. Just smart, thoughtful, kind.
Yeah.
Direct.
Yeah.
All this.
Okay. Things. What about best remake film that was better than the original?
Okay. I love and respect the original Fright Night. I think that the remake that came out, gosh, when would that have been? Like 2011, 2012? Okay. I think it, character-wise, does some stuff a little bit better than the original movie did. I don't necessarily think that it's like the better movie, only watch this one, but I do like it more.
Yeah. Okay. I what I need to do is test out whether the original Ocean's 11 was better than the George Clooney one.
I don't know yet. I haven't watched it yet. At the time that movie came out, I think the consensus was that Soderbergh made a movie good that was originally like okay but not great. So I don't know. Yeah. Maybe it's changed.
That makes sense. Okay. What about any sequel or prequel? I guess that was better than the original film.
Sequel or prequel better than the original film? That's, oh man, these are all really hot takes, man. Your YouTube comment section is going to be on fire.
I hope. I mean,
you want the engagement, so there you go. Yeah. I think I'm really partial to Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, which is in the book.
Okay.
And I don't necessarily know that it's better, but I think it is
That's
one
a
of
good
those.
Film.
It's a really great movie.
I don't think anybody leaves that film feeling like that was a bummer or that wasn't good or that was less than.
Right. And I think it's one of those that actually makes the movies that follow it better because you have that extra bit of context.
So I think
that's
That's a good one. It's almost too easy, but it's because it's like maybe the only one out there that's actually that much better.
Right.
There's not that many. So yeah. Well, Abby, thank you so much. So you mentioned earlier where people can find your writings. Can you just recap where can people find you if they want to read some of your articles, and if you have a website or if they can follow you online?
Yeah, I am. I'm a columnist at Sojourners magazine. I also write regularly for The Pitch and Think Christian. I'm on their podcast as well. You can also find me on social media. I'm still on Twitter/X for now, but I'm posting more often at Blue Sky, and you can find me both places at Abby Olcese, ABBYOLCESE.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for your gift of this book. This has been great. I'm looking forward to continuing it and watching the films and seeing what you have to say about how I can experience the church here at the movies.
Yeah, I'm excited for the journey that you and your family are going to go on. I hope it's fun.
Yeah, thanks. All right. Well, thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely.